his information and knowledge and long experience about Ship Island and the events out there and other things that I'm sure you want to talk about. So let's welcome Mr. Edwards.
And to Dr. West, thanks a lot. I always talk about my son. He is nice, but he's not that nice. But he is nice. And Pat and I have worked together at Gulfport, talking about different things, historical things, events. And what I have really is a timeline. When we talk about Ship Island and the black Union soldiers, at that time we called them Negro soldiers, so sometimes the names are switched back and forth. But it just didn't happen that way. You have to understand Louisiana. Louisiana was a little different than the rest of America at that time because you had the East Coast, and Louisiana was not part of that. Louisiana was under the French, and then they were under the Spanish for 40 years before you had the Louisiana Purchase. And with that being said, I have to take you back because a lot of times, and I know even in my case, there are many things in history we tend, and look, I hope you have open mind, because most people don't. You have to understand the black experience, because it was not taught in school. This was things that, for whatever reason, was left out of history. Most of the things I'm going to talk about, you cannot find in the history books. Even the Native Guards, you cannot find. Even today, you cannot find the Native Guards in the history books. So, let me tell you how all of that evolved. And we got to go back to about 1729. In 1729, you had the Natchez Massacre. What happened was the Indians and some black slaves took over Natchez. It was a French outpost. Now, when it got back to New Orleans, you had one or two that survived. They left New Orleans with some free blacks and slaves to go back to Natchez to capture Natchez, which they did. But from that time on, you had what we call a black militia. So in Louisiana, they always recognized from 1729 on the black militia. Now, what Dr. West did not say is that as of today, well, I gave it up after 8 years, but I was president of the SAR, which is the Sons of the American Revolution. And most people, when they see me as son of the American Revolution, I'm the president on the coast, one would say, how in the world did you join the Sons of the American Revolution? Because we're talking about 1776. Well, what happened was when, Britain decided to invade the East Coast, you had Galvez just happened to be in New Orleans, and he was over the Spanish area, which is 13 states. I mean, that was before the Louisiana Purchase. So when Spain declared war on England also, Galvez went to Baton Rouge first with blacks, the black militia. As a matter of fact, the black militia and the Indians was the one who led the expedition going to Baton Rouge from New Orleans. After capturing Baton Rouge, because that's where you had an English outpost, you had another outpost in Mobile, Fort Charlotte. They had blacks that also participated in that. So, with that in mind, and you had Spanish declaring war on, well, let's put it this way, they helped the English. They provided black powder, they provided guns, they provided anything they need. It came from the Spanish provided all of this. So that made those soldiers that fought under Galvez were eligible to join the Sons of the American Revolution. Do we understand that, how that all came about? So I'm a descendant of that particular group. So I was able to join the Sons of the American Revolution. Now, we move forward again because you had the Haitian Revolution. That was happening during this time also. You had, from 1790 until about 1809, you had all of those blacks that fought with the French. They had to get out of Haiti. Haiti declared their independence in 1804. So they ran all of the blacks and the white slave owners. They went into exile in Cuba. Claiborne sent for them to come into New Orleans and with 9 ships. So now you have all of these blacks coming into, free blacks coming into New Orleans, and a lot of the slaves coming into New Orleans at the same time, and all the slave owners actually coming into New Orleans. So it doubles the population of New Orleans. But this would happen in 1803, which is not being said. They have, when you purchasing something, when Napoleon decided to sell Louisiana Territory, they had what we call a review. You know, military reviews, when you're changing from this command to another command, they're giving up something, or you buying something. Anyway, Claiborne is sitting in the stands. Claiborne at that time was over the Mississippi Territory, and Jefferson said, hey, why don't you go ahead and take over the Louisiana Territory? Anyway, he goes over there as a territorial governor. He had never seen blacks in arms. The first regiment to march in that review was the Black Regiment. Claiborne said, and this is actually happened, I have all of his papers. He said, I had never seen this. I need to go to the White House. Well, we call it the White House, but he needed to go to Washington and say, hey, what should I do with this militia? And in the meantime, the black militia met with Claiborne. Claiborne at this time was concerned about the Haitian Revolution, and they told Claiborne, look, you know, we on your side, and whatever the discussion was, it's all in his papers. And he decided to recognize the black militia in 1806. So 1806, now we have the black militias recognized. We get now to the Battle of New Orleans. The Battle of New Orleans, you had 2 battalions of free people of color that fought in that battle. I'm a descendant also of 1812. I am the first president of the 1812 group in the state of Maryland. And I hate to use the pronoun I, but I'm just saying facts. This is a part of history that most people don't hear about when you're talking about the history of the U.S. and how this thing came about. So this is the other side that I'm talking about. So you might sort of understand when one say, well, you know, say negative things. The blacks participated in this country. You had the hero on that battle was a guy named Slavery. Those were the Haitians that came into New Orleans. You had 2 battalions of free people of color, one that was there already. The Haitians that came in, they had their own battalion, and they were fierce fighters. And so Slavery, that you'd never hear of, was the hero in the Battle of New Orleans. He's the one that did most of the fighting. And he was there from the beginning. You had many different battles that happened in New Orleans, and he was there through all battles. Now, so we're moving up. We're going further. It's the evolution now. So, the Civil War is breaking out. Let me explain something to you about these forts. what happened after 1812, the U.S. realized at that time that they could not protect the East Coast and they could not protect the Gulf. So from the whole East Coast, you had all these islands out there. They decided to build these forts on all of these, and Sumter was one of them, that they would build forts. That's the U.S. government. This one started in 1858. It is, if you go out there, the bricks are different from the original ones, because what happened was the second set of bricks came from Boston. But anyway, now in New Orleans, these are the Native Guards. Now this is where we get into the Native Guards, which is a little touchy here, because what Governor Moore came out and said, he said, look, he said, I want everyone to come down to Canal Street from the ages of 18 to 45. That include everybody. So the free people of color got militia. We have organized military at that time. So the blacks showed up on Canal Street, and they marched to 2 parades. But when the legislature of Louisiana met, it said no, only free whites. And I don't know why they said free whites, but they were the only one that could join in the fight for Louisiana. We're talking Louisiana. Even though Louisiana had seceded from the Union, but Louisiana was sort of on its own, had its own flag. What happened is that the blacks disbanded. That militia disbanded. They went home. Now, when Farragut captured New Orleans in 1862, now this is just really during the time that the war was starting. You know, I mean, but the strategy of Lincoln was to blockade the East Coast all the way around to the Gulf, so Spain nor England could send any supplies in, and the South could not send any supplies out. And what the generals said, this is the Union side, the Mississippi River is the backbone. If we capture Mississippi River, the war is over, because you have no way of sending supplies, you have no way of shipping going up the East Coast, south to the east. So with that strategy, if you keep that in mind, but let's talk about the Native Guards. Now the Native Guards are there, but they're disbanded. They had one guy, and I heard one say about General Phelps. Well, General Phelps, the guys had been working, after they had captured New Orleans, the guys that were working at the base in New Orleans, black guys. General Phelps said, talk to them, and they asked him and said, look, we got a militia, and we'll be willing to fight with you. So General Phelps went to Butler, General Butler, and a lot of times people call him Butler the Beast, but Butler was really not a beast. You're under martial law. Martial law is totally different than running a government, a civilian government. I'm military, I'm retired military. Military people, they just do things. So anyway, Phelps resigned over. Butler told him no, he couldn't do it because Lincoln had tried it with General Hunter out in South Carolina, and Lincoln told Hunter he could not recruit blacks. So anyway, Butler done it anyway. Now Butler, on his letter to Stratton, he said, let me tell you something, and this is the 1st Regiment. He said, you cannot tell. He said, I'm recruiting these guys, which he did, and you cannot tell if they're white or black. Because 98% of that regiment were fathered by Europeans. I don't know if anyone been to New Orleans or they've been to Pass Christian. Pass Christian is part of that New Orleans. Most of the families there have a New Orleans, because I'm talking blacks. They were fathered by Europeans. Most of them got French names or they have Spanish names. It's the same family. If you see, like my mother name is Perrault. We have white Perraults, we have black Perraults. Same family. DNA, same thing. Okay, but anyway, and I said that to say this. When that letter got to Washington, they never answered the letter. But Butler said, I cannot hold New Orleans with what I have. I need to recruit these guys. So Butler recruited 3 regiments. The 1st Regiment, 3rd Regiment, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. Now we got 3 regiments. So, keep in mind the Mississippi River again. So the 1st and the 3rd went to the Mississippi River at Port Hudson. That's down from Vicksburg. They were trying to capture Vicksburg, but they couldn't get to Vicksburg because you got to pass through Port Hudson. They could not capture Fort Hudson. The 1st and the 3rd was slaughtered because the Confederates were there waiting for them, and they up on the bluff, and they're trying to capture Fort Hudson, could not do it. Now, the 2nd Regiment was sent to Ship Island, and when I say Ship Island, 2nd Regiment, regiments, the way it's constructed, you have what they call companies. So you got 10 companies in one regiment. So you had, they sent 3 of them. 3 of them went to Fort Pike and Fort McComb. Most people don't talk about Fort McComb, but you can't get into New Orleans through the Lake Pontchartrain because you got Fort Pike there and you have Fort McComb at that time. Fort McComb right now is almost underwater. But then you have 7 of the companies came to Chicago. So that was the 2nd Regiment. The problem with that coming to Ship Island, by the way, you had a Confederate general, Twigg, that was on Ship Island at the time. You know, what happened, the South had sent all of these people to their troops, to these forts that the U.S. had constructed. Now, what happened was, the ship Massachusetts came in, went around, fired on the fort. Overnight, Twigg said, I don't see why we should be here anyway. So he left. So some people might call that Fort Twigg because he was there first. Then the ship Massachusetts came in, and they named it after, and they call the ship Island, but they might say Fort Massachusetts, but not necessarily so. You know, it's still Ship Island. Most documents will say Ship Island. But anyway, they had several regiments that were out there. They had white regiments, Union soldiers that were there. So when, in the meantime, Butler left, Banks came in, and Banks had some problems. His problem is that you had 76 commissioned officers. See, and what people don't say is even prior to 1860s, you got a lot of educated blacks. You had 76 commissioned officers. You had doctors there. You know, you had dentists, blacks that were there. They were well educated. They had 76 officers. They had more, and out of a total during the Civil War of blacks, about 106 commissioned officers. 76 came from these 3 regiments. Well educated people. As a matter of fact, Pinchback, who later became the governor for 30 days of Louisiana, was at Fort Pike. I cannot find any documentation saying that he came to Ship Island. But many of these guys, another guy named Dumas. Now, Francis Dumas, real strange case, he was part of the 2nd Regiment. Dumas' father sent Dumas to be educated in France. So Dumas was in France at the time his father died. But his father left him everything. And 100 male slaves that were on that plantation, he volunteered them. He probably told them to join the 2nd Regiment. But they were part of the 2nd Regiment. Now, the big problem that Banks had, Banks did not feel that blacks should be commissioned officers. The regiments that were there, the white regiments that were there, and the white regiments that were at Fort Pike would not salute the blacks. So, what happened at Ship Island was that they had a guy named Daniels, and Daniels were an abolitionist before he joined, but he was colonel. You know, many of these guys that just joined the military, all of these commissioned officers. But anyway, Daniels, if a guy didn't salute a black officer, he'd put him in jail, because they had a jail there. And the commanding officer of the whites would not salute the blacks. He put everybody in jail. Now, so now you got mass confusion out there. So, of course, Daniels, Banks sent for Daniels to New Orleans. He finally, eventually got a bad discharge, but that was later on, about 1864. But anyway, they had, problems, racial problems on Ship Island, because that was a supply place. Ship Island it's a deep port. I mean, it's all the big ships could go there, and that's where they were refueled, at Ship Island. In April the 9th of 1863, they did have an engagement in Pascagoula. That was one of the few, and they had the first engagement of, blacks, a totally black unit confronting the Confederates. And from that engagement, they held Pascagoula for 5 hours. They were leaving. They had another ship that was their escort down there. For whatever reason, they fired on, supposed to be cover, but they fired on these guys coming back, and they lost more men on the ship from their own people. Now, Daniels went to the ship, and he thought that was intentional, because they lost about 7 men. But Daniels did not put that in his report. He did put in his report, though, that they did capture Pascagoula. They took the flag. They raised the American flag in Pascagoula. They also participated in the capture of Mobile. What had happened, Mobile was the last big city to fall. You could not capture, they could not capture Mobile from going to the east. They tried to catch it. They could not. So what they did, they sent these black troops to Florida, and they would move west. And this actually happened according to the report. See, one thing about the military, what I didn't, and I still don't understand, when you're writing history books, because a historian, when you're writing a history book, you go out to D.C. and you look at all the records. Every engagement in the military, you have an after report. So all of this stuff that I'm saying is actual. It's in archives. You can go find all of this. Now, when they went to Florida, they came in, the Confederates were looking for them to come in the other way, and when they realized it was blacks, because it was 9 black regiments that went in, the Confederates ran because they did not want to be captured by blacks. That's the way the report read. And what happened to these guys? They became, after they got out of the military, they went back. Matter of fact, this letter right here, and my relatives and my great-great-grandfather and grandfather, great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather signed this letter. This letter went to Lincoln. They had a conference with Abraham Lincoln, and they wanted to vote. What had happened was they told Lincoln, look, we would love to vote. And Lincoln said, okay, we'll see what I can do. So that's part of the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, that they were able to vote. But this is the letter. They had a conference with Lincoln. I do have a copy of that, and I have a copy of actual signatures where my relatives signed this petition. Is there any other questions we could, get into Ship Island if you want to? Any other questions you might have?
How long was the home guard on Ship Island?
They got there in January of 1863, and they stayed there until June of 1865. Without leaving. You could not leave.
Ooh.
So, in wool uniforms.
Excuse me, but in wool, up on Ship Island?
So, is there any other questions, something that maybe I could clear up?
It's just a comment. You mentioned that this was, what you've been saying isn't very well known.
Right.
There was a movie, I don't know, 10 or so years ago called Glory, about a Massachusetts regiment of black soldiers during the Civil War. And the idea of that movie was the officers were white, and they had to organize these, most of them were escaped slaves.
Mm-hmm.
But what you're saying is, a much more interesting thing, that they were black officers, here. And, that would have made it more in some ways a more interesting.
Yeah, well, now we talking in New Orleans, we talking, blacks that, matter of fact, Duma spoke 5 different languages.
Yeah.
We talking something totally different. We talking the East Coast, and that was part of the 54th was part of Massachusetts coming down to South Carolina. Now, in Louisiana was a little different at that particular time, because even in the War of 1812, we had many officers, black officers in the War of 1812 that you don't hear about. We had, as a matter of fact, Savory was a major, and they had another guy named Vincent Populus. He was also a major. They demanded that they would have their commissioned officers, and they demanded, this is Louisiana at that time, that they be, that they wanted their own officers, and they got their own officers.
Well, there should really be a movie or a book.
Well, there were many things. Yeah, there were many things in that movie that was totally wrong when they said that Massachusetts was the first.
Yeah.
Louisiana Native Guards was the first official units to join the Union.
Yeah.
I was just saying it's the difference between what you're talking about historically and what somebody portrayed in a movie. That does not have to be to the facts.
Right. And nothing against them, but I'm saying it was totally different.
That got more
Yeah.
real. They have to make it where it would sell. So they have to portray, great white fathers saving these slaves and making them into men when they wouldn't have been men otherwise.
But I think a lot of people saw it as fact.
Yeah, well, that happens.
Yeah, that was the sad thing about it.
That's what happens if you don't do research.
Yes, sir.
So the officers in the regiment were actually recognized by the Union as being commissioned.
Oh, yeah. Well, see, at that time, see, commissions, you can commission a person in a state. You could have state commission officers. And that's really how most of these guys, now almost all of the generals knew each other. You know, we always talk about Robert E. Lee was the greatest, and Beauregard, maybe. All of them came out of West Point, South and North. They knew each other. Mm-hmm.
You were talking about Louisiana in the beginning, but there were free blacks that owned slaves in New Orleans.
Well, if you're,
all of that.
I agree with you, but you have to keep in mind that their fathers were Europeans.
Were Europeans. I know.
Right. So all he did was whatever his father did, that's what he did.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is in
Go ahead.
Louisiana, it was totally different.
Yeah, look.
At one time, you know, and so they recognized the free blacks, and then I guess the black militia, but then during Fort Massachusetts or whatever, I guess when Mississippi got involved, they didn't really want to recognize the officers, or when the rest of the United States after the Louisiana Purchase, I guess.
No, well, no. Louisiana Purchase was in 1803. Okay,
Yeah.
we still not, and that was. If I could talk about Louisiana, if I could talk about New Orleans, just a little bit. On this side of New Orleans, if you go down the Canal Street, okay, you have what we call a French Quarter, a fou carré. Really, it's Spanish because most of the French were in that area. But this is this side. And this is where you had the French, and behind the French quarters you have what they call the Tremé area. The French guy had the white family here, and in the Tremé area is where he had his black family.
Exactly.
So he had two families, and in many cases they even left with the Moreno family. When they left New Orleans, going to what we call around Opelousas in that area, he took both families with him. His black family and his white family.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know if you read that book, Bayou Road? It tells about that.
So tell us about Lumberton and where your relatives down in.
Oh, that's a whole, I got many stories.
That one later on. That's the last one that I read.
Well, the last one you read, which is really strange also. I did not know. Now this is one side of my family, and I don't know if you saw the article, but it was in both. It was in the Echo and the Sun Herald. But my great grandfather. This is my great grandfather. My great grandfather was fathered by the slave owner in Bay St. Louis, the Arnold family. And Ripley fathered my great grandfather. We have documented proof. I've done the DNA in our family, match. So we had a big write-up about that. Matter of fact, I just received them recognize it in Bay St. Louis a couple of weeks ago. We was down there talking about it. But that's, most people don't know, but that's normal in a black family. Anytime, it doesn't have to be complexion. Because in my family, we go from black to white. In my immediate family, matter of fact, my younger brother had blue eyes when he was born because the family was so mixed up in most of these black families. With the DNA, all of us, and especially down here, in mine, I'm about 45 European and 55 African. But this is something that's totally different. Again, my family came from, one part of my family came from the Canary Islands. So I belong to the Icelandos in New Orleans. That's a whole nother ballgame. So that's another story,
Okay.
which is an interesting story.
got one more question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think you talked about most of it, but the main battles that they fought while they were out there was Pascagoula and Mobile?
And Mobile.
Okay.
What about Pass Christianity?
No, Pass Christian, they had a battle in 1862, but that was before
Gotcha.
they went, because they didn't get out there until 63. But they did fight one, you know, the Union in 1862. And I know they had a reenactment some time ago about, that was at the Booth War, where they said that they had won that battle. The Confederates had won that battle. That's not true. Yes, sir.
I'm not a military person, but you talked about companies, and how many people were there on Ship Island?
Okay.
When
One company is about 90 people.
90.
It runs from 80 to 100.
Yeah, okay.
And they had 7 that was there.
And nobody died of heat
So there's about
stroke?
700 people.
Oh, yeah, they had many of
Didn't
them.
they have yellow fever too?
Many of them died out of the island. But what happened, they're buried at Chalmette. That's what they took, you know, they came and got the bodies out and took them to Chalmette. Now, the blacks are buried at Chalmette. The whites that were buried there, they interred them in Metairie, took them out and took them to Metairie. That was later on. Yes, sir.
Was there a prisoner of war camp there on Ship Island?
That was the prisoner of camp. That's why the blacks had 2 jobs. They were protecting the Gulf, plus it was a POW camp. And they were in charge. The blacks were in charge. And from what I gathered, they did draw the line. They had one lady from New Orleans. She did not. Well, they said that she was on the balcony and she decided to empty her chamber pot. And they took her there for a year. The sad thing about it, they took her maid there with her.
Yeah, he let's see. He told the editor of the Times-Picayune that any more ladies that threw their night pots on his troops walking down in the French Quarter, he was going to have them arrested. And they put it in the Times-Picayune.
Oh yeah, and treat them as ladies of the night.
Yeah.
And that actually happened. That was Butler. That's why they hated Butler. Now, as far as the silver, it wasn't Butler, it was his brother that took the silver from New Orleans. You know, from different people. And you're correct about that. That is part of the historical records. Yes, sir.
Jim Stevens did an enormous study of Ship Island. And we've had a speaker here, Rosemary Finley, who heard his tour many times. And she talked about how much he knew about it. That he would walk around and he would tell people where the bricks came from. And I always wondered what that could possibly be about. But apparently, you say some of the bricks came from Boston. I've never heard that.
Yeah, what happened when they got there, it was only half finished. See, it started in 1858. And that was right during the time, right after the Civil War, when they went out and then they brought all the bricks in from Massachusetts to finish
To
it.
answer your question, I was always curious about.
Yeah, it's 2 different color bricks. If you go out there, you can see the lining with the 2 different colors. And sir, I know you had some questions that maybe I can answer. I don't know. No?
I'm a sponge. I'm soaking it up.
Oh. But go ahead.
Well, one thing I was curious about, General White said, following 1803 and the Louisiana Purchase, I read that Thomas Jefferson banned the sale of slaves in New Orleans.
He did. What happened was he did not want any slaves to come in from Jamaica. What had happened was that a lot of the Haitians See, Haitians did not want to be slaves. So he, well, but I mean, they would fight and die. You know, it was not like they would not,
They could not be domesticated.
you could not domesticate them, right? And so, but most of those Haitians left and went to Jamaica, so that's what he banned. And that's part of his, that is part of his letters, that he would not take any coming in from Jamaica. When he sent for all those ships, you know, to get all of the blacks that were free blacks, and they had the landowners with their slaves, but he would not take any coming in from Jamaica. That's correct. And and that doubled the population of New Orleans. So most of the people that live in New Orleans, and especially, I'll say most of the blacks that I know, they have that the Haitian right, because that's where my people came from also, was part of that migration. What had happened, they sent them, when they left Haiti, they sent them into Cuba. And they stayed in Cuba, in exile in Cuba. They stayed there for a couple of years before they brought them into New Orleans.
I think we could probably go on for a long, long time, but we promised the city we'd be out of here at 7 o'clock. So